Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Text 25. Bhishmadrona pamukhataha sarvesam. Oh, it's gone.
I put it up on the screen as well now.
Oh, I had my own thing. Sorry, Krishna.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry. Okay. Right. Bhishmadrona pamukhataha sarvesam cha mahikshitam uvacha partapashyaitan samavetan kurumiti.
In the presence of Bhishma, Drona, and all the other chieftains of the world, the Lord said, "Just behold, Partha, all the Kurus assembled here."
Text 26. Tatra asyachditan partaha pitrinata pitamahan acharyan parmatulan bhartin putran patran sakim stata swasuran sukadaschaiva senayorubhavyodapi.
There Arjuna could see, within the midst of the armies of both parties, his fathers, grandfathers, teachers, maternal uncles, brothers, sons, grandsons, friends, and also his fathers-in-law and well-wishers.
Text 27. Tan samikshya sakaunteya sarvam bandhunavastitan kripaya paraya veshtu vishidan idamabravit.
When the son of Kunti, Arjuna saw all these different grades of friends and relatives, he became overwhelmed with compassion and spoke thus.
Text 28. Arjuna uvacha drishvemam swajanam Krishna yuyutsum sam upastitam siddhanti mama gatrani mukham cha parishushati.
Arjuna said, "My dear Krishna, seeing my friends and relatives present before me in such a fighting spirit, I feel the limbs of my body quivering and my mouth drying up."
Text 29. Vepashtuscha sarire me romahashascha jayate gadivam shramsati hastat tvakchaiva paridahyate.
My whole body is trembling, my hair is standing on end, my bow Gandiva is slipping from my hand, and my skin is burning.
Text 30. Nacha saknami avastatum brahmatiya cha me manaha nimichani cha pasyami viparitani keshava.
I am now unable to stand here any longer. I am forgetting myself and my mind is reeling. I see only causes of misfortune, O Krishna, killer of the Kesi demon.
Text 31. Nachasreyo nupashyami hadva swajanamavave na kankshe vijayam Krishna na charajyam sukanicha.
I do not see how any good can come from killing my own kinsman in this battle, nor can I, my dear Krishna, desire any subsequent victory, kingdom, or happiness.
Text 32 to 35. Kim no rajyena govinda kim bhogair jivitena sva ye samarte kangshitam no rajyam bhogai bhoga sukhani cha taime vasti tata yudhe pranamstyaktva tanani cha Acharya pitara putras tataiva cha pitaha. Matula swasura paura shyala sambandinastata etannaham tamichami jnanatopi madhusudan. Api trailokya rajyasya hetu kimnu mahikrite nihatya dhartarashtranaha kapritisya janardana.
O Govinda, of what avail to us are a kingdom, happiness, or even life itself when all those for whom we may desire them are now arrayed on this battlefield? O Madhusanana, when teachers, fathers, sons, grandfathers, maternal uncles, fathers-in-law, grandsons, brothers-in-law, and other relatives are ready to give up their lives and properties and are standing before me, why should I wish to kill them, even though they might otherwise kill me? O maintainer of all living entities, I am not prepared to fight with them, even in exchange for the three worlds, let alone this earth. What pleasure will we derive from killing the sons of Dhritarashtra?
Text 36. Papamevrastraye dasman hatvatan atayinaha tasman vayam hantum dartarashtan sarbandarvan swajanam hi katam hatva sukhina syama madhava.
Sin will overcome us if we slay such aggressors. Therefore, it is not proper for us to kill the sons of Dhritarashtra and our friends. What should we gain, O Krishna, husband of the goddess of fortune? And how could we be happy by killing our own kinsmen?
Text 37 to 38. Yadyapi etena pasyanti lobo pahata setasaha kulakshaya kritam dosham mitra dohi chapatakam katham najneyam ashmanihi papad amman nivartitum kulakshaya kritam dosham prapasyadbhi janardana.
O Janardana, although these men, their hearts overtaken by greed, see no fault in killing one's family or quarreling with friends, why should we, who can see the crime in destroying a family, engage in these acts of sin?
Text 39. Kulaksheye panashyanti kuladharma sanatanaha dharme nasti kulam krishnam adharmo bhiva havatyuta.
With the destruction of the dynasty, the eternal family tradition is vanquished, and thus the rest of the family becomes involved in irreligion.
Text 40. Adharma bhiva bhavat krishna pradusyanti kulashriyaha Shrishu dustashu varsha shneya jayate varnashankaraha.
When irreligion is prominent in the family, O Krishna, the women of the family become polluted, and from the degradation of womanhood, O descendant of Rishi, comes unwanted progeny.
Text 41. Sankaro narakayaiva kulagyanam kulasyapcha pantanti piptaro hyasam lupta pindo dakakriyaha.
An increase of unwanted population certainly causes hellish life both for the family and for those who destroy the family tradition. The ancestors of such corrupt families fall down because the performances for offering them food and water are entirely stopped.
Text 42. Doshairitai kulagranam varna sankara karakahi utsadyanti jati dharmaha kula dharmascha sasvataha.
By the evil deeds of those who destroy the family tradition and thus give rise to unwanted children, all kinds of community projects and family welfare activities are devastated.
Text 43. Utsanna dharmanam manusyanam janardanam narake niratam vasu bhavat iti anususruma.
O Krishna, maintainer of the people, I have heard by disciplic succession that those whose family traditions are destroyed dwell always in hell.
Text 44. Aho bata mahat papam kartum vasitavyam vayam yadrajya sukalobhena hantum swajana udyataha.
Alas, how strange it is that we are preparing to commit greatly sinful acts. Driven by the desire to enjoy royal happiness, we are intent on killing our own kinsmen.
Text 45. Yadimam apratikaram sastram sastrapanayaha dartarashtaranihanyus tanmikshemam taram bhavet.
Better for me if the sons of Dhritarashtra, weapons in hand, were to kill me unarmed and unresisting in the battlefield.
Text 46. Sanjaya Vacha Eva Muktvarjuna Sankhye Rato Pasta Upashvistat Vishrijya Saram Chapam Sokam Sa Vignamanasaha.
Sanjaya said, Arjuna, having thus spoken on the battlefield, cast aside his bow and arrows and sat down on the chariot, his mind overwhelmed with grief.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Pramod Prabhu and Julie Mataji, for wonderful recitations and taking us through the verses from 25 to 46 of Bhagavad Gita. So grateful to both of you. Okay, so today's verse is 44. I'll just go to verse number 44 once more. We'll read it through and we'll start. Yeah. Aho batmahat papam kartum vyavasita vayam yad rajaya shukhalobhena antum swajanam udayataha antum swajanamudyataha. Alas, how strange it is that we are preparing to commit greatly sinful acts, driven by the desire to enjoy royal happiness. We are intent on killing our own kinsmen. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Driven by selfish motives, one may be inclined to such sinful acts as the killing of one's own brother, father, or mother. There are many such instances in the history of the world, but Arjun, being a saintly devotee of the Lord, is always conscious of moral principles and therefore takes care to avoid such activities. We'll just do Mangala Charan prayers. Om Agyanam Timrindasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Sa Padantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitam He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Shri Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Pancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaivacha Patitanam Pavnebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki Jai. So we are almost on the completion of chapter 1, and we can see reluctancy of Arjun to fight is taking shape and form of a decision that he will not be willing to take this fight forward because he feels himself very guilty about committing a grave sinful act by killing anybody on the battlefield. So this is a very difficult situation that Arjun is standing between. We also saw when I was doing the last week's Bhagavad Gita session in 36th verse, he was building it up, and he was saying that if I slay aggressors, then it won't be a proper thing to do because I'll be killing the sons of the Dhritarashtra and our friends who are our relatives. And how can I be happy, or we can be happy by killing our own relations, people in our relations, our own kinsmen? And then in the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentioned about that if you kill 6 kind of aggressors, it's not considered to be sinful by Vedic literatures. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are killing them personally. In our cases, like the societies are built of Kshatriyas and Brahmanas and Sudras and Vaisyas. The Kshatriyas are generally the one who is dutiful to protect the kingdoms, to protect the citizens, and to protect the rights of the citizens. And anybody who is an aggressor, who is harming the citizens, must be punished by Kshatriyas. Arjun being Kshatriyas, Kshatriya, he had the right to kill the 6 kind of aggressors. And these aggressors, one was the poison giver. And we discussed in very detail how Duryodhan tried to kill Bhimsen by feeding him in poison and food in the very early childhood days, and how Bhim then traveled to Nagaloka and he drank the ambrosia and became powerful like 10,000 elephants, and he came back even more powerful as he was before. And by seeing that, Duryodhan's heart was burning with agony. And the second kind of aggressors are those who sets fire to the house. Now, one who sets fire to the house, if you kill them, there is absolutely no sin. And we will see in today's session how Kauravas were building a plan or a plot to burn the Pandavas' house and how they plotted it. So that's another discussion I would like to bring about today. Then there are 4 more kind of aggressors. One who attacks with weapons or one who plunder your riches, one who occupies your land, one who kidnaps a wife. So we can see that all 6 of them were committed by Duryodhana and party. And therefore, acting against them is not something that is sinful. But Arjun is coming from a very, very pious background. He's coming from a very saintly background. And when I say so, although he's a warrior, but he's coming from a heritage which is saintly. Pandu, his own father, who was very, very powerful king, was not so interested in the worldly pleasures towards the later part of his life. And therefore, he chose to be in the forest and live a life of asceticism. So Pandu actually, between Dhritarashtra and Pandu, Dhritarashtra being the elder brother, should have been enthroned as a king of Hastinapur. Unfortunately, he was born blind. He was born blind at the time of conceiving, folded his eyelids by seeing the slightly horrifying form of sage Vyasdev, who had come to conceive a child in her womb on the request of Satyavati, in the absence of her husband. So she could not hold that form in her eyes, and when she closed her eyes and conceived in that position, her child was unfortunately born blind, who was Dhritarashtra. And Dhritarashtra, being blind, could not be appointed as the king. And then Pandu, whose mother turned pale, looking at the horrifying, slightly untidy form of Vyasadeva, she turned pale, and therefore Pandu was yellowish in color. But at the same time, Pandu was extremely brave king. And because Dhritarashtra can't be enthroned, Pandu was enthroned as the king. So Pandu, when he grew up, he subjugated many other warlike kings, and he kind of ranged his empire in the entire globe like a fire. He was extremely brave, and therefore he would fight with a lot of monarchs and kings, and in due course of time, almost all the monarchs submitted unto Pandu without any resistance. And Pandu, after 1-year campaign, he returned to the capital of Hastinapur with to the delight of the citizens, with a lot of power and wealth and elephants and oxen and camels and horses and chariots, all laden with riches and wealth. And as far as the eyes cannot see, so much of wealth he brought to the kingdom. The gold, the silver, and the pearls, and all kinds of stones and corals were all piled up. Millions of cows and horses and other animals. So, and even costly blankets and rugs and skins from rare deers. So all kinds of riches that one can imagine. And Pandu had it all, in abundance of it, due to his powerful demeanor and brave and very, very chivalry approach to spread his kingdom. After doing all this and collecting so much of wealth, Pandu was always inclined to give up the luxurious life of palace, and he wanted to go out in the forest and live a very simple life. So in due course of time, he decided that with his 2 wives, Kunti and Madri, he would go to the forest, live simple life, and meanwhile, on his behalf, Dhritarashtra, he was officiated as a king in Hastinapur, but to rule on behalf of his younger brother. Of course, Dhritarashtra was supported by Vidura and Drona and Bhishma and Drona and Kripa. So there were plenty of other support to support the to give advice to Dhritarashtra and counsel to Dhritarashtra. Pandu had mastered his senses, so he actually gave everything away as a gift to Dhritarashtra, and he was in the forest. One day, Pandu was dwelling in the forest, and his urge of um, killing animals in the form of hunting, not to enjoy his senses, but in the form of hunting, came about. He saw a very good large couple deer who were mating at that time, and he did not took much notice of that, and he bolted. He led a swift arrow upon them with a golden feather shaft. That golden feather shaft pierced the body of the deer, specifically male deer, who fell down crying. And to the king's surprise, the deer began to speak in human voice and very painful voice. And he said, "How shameful of you that you have gone against the scriptures or ordinance of scriptures. You have behaved like a man who has no control of senses. How, O king, you are a descendant of such a noble dynasty of Bharat Maharaj. You have appeared in that race that you have come to do this act, this impious act." Pandu could not understand this messaging, and he was still justifying, saying that as a king, it is my duty to hunt and make sure that I protect the sages and rishis in the forest, and also to practice my art of weaponry, which is a kingly art. I must practice, and in the interest of the forest dwellers, I have killed these deers. I have in the past killed these deers, and I was never blamed of not following my duty. Oh dear, why do you now reprove of me? So, okay, somebody's on unmute. I'm going to mute. Thank you. So the deer then said to Pandu that I am not much worried about that you have injured me, but I'm worried that you have killed the deer at the time when he's mating with his wife. He said that I am not a deer, I am a rishi with the name Kindam. I'm Kindam Rishi. And me and my wife, we don't have a place to live. We don't have a dwelling where we can go and mate to get the progeny. And therefore, we took this form of deer. And now, when we were mating, and my wife, and I was about to conceive this child in the womb of my wife, you have come from nowhere and you have attacked me, who's innocent and who's weaponless. How extremely cruel and sinful this is. You must be liable. This is liable to lead you to hell. And like that, when the deer spoke, Pandu was completely shocked, and he could not figure out what has just happened. And he started to think that how he had allowed himself to be so much passionate that he happened to kill a rishi, and it was a calamity. He's hung, his head hung in shame. And Rishi Kindam went ahead and said that you didn't know my true identity, so you do not fear of the sin of killing a Brahmin. But because you have killed me at the time when I was indulging in pleasure, therefore there is a curse that will fall upon you now. When next you approach your wife out of desire, you will immediately fall dead. O king, As I was plunged into grief when I was happy, you shall also meet with grief at such a time. And just right in front of the eyes of Pandu, this deer, after speaking these words, gave up his life. And Pandu stood for some moments. He was unable to move. He just couldn't gather as to what has happened. He was afflicted by sorrow. When he came back, he spoke to his wives as to what has happened. He started to feel guilty about how my life is simply spent in killing innocent creatures. And the gods have forsaken me, and now I'm standing as cursed person, as a cursed man. But Pandu was, as he has already taken control of his senses, he resolved to the life of austerity. And he declared from that moment that he would accept the vow of celibacy, just as Bhishma Dev has done it. And he would seek salvation by renouncing the sexual pleasures, which are great impediments to the spiritual life. And this way, he shaved his head, covered his body with dust, and then he declared to his wives that they should go back to the capital of Hastinapur, and he would now be performing his austerities and tapasyas in the forest. But Kunti and Madhuri, after hearing this story, they were torn by grief that they will have to leave their husband behind and go to the pleasures of Hastinapur as queens, which was not acceptable to them. So they then proposed that let's accept the order of Vanaprastha, where husband and wife, they don't come together for pleasures, but they do perform the austerities and tapasyas and meditations, etc., just together, but not pursue the pleasures of senses. So this way, they convinced Pandu that you follow the strictest of the austerity of celibacy, and we will not come in your way, and we will all together perform our Nitya Dharma, which is our goal of life, to please the Lord and perform austerities together. So it so happened that now when Pandu was living in these mountains, they finally happened to reach to a place called a Sapta Shrota, which is 100-peaked mountain, where there were a lot of rishis and siddhas and charanas living in that region. And Pandu then endeared himself to them by his qualities of humility, self-control, devotion, and that way he started to converse with them and listen from them, and he was living a very quite simple life at Saptashrota mountain. At that point in time, he started to realize that he has no children. And according to scriptures, he said that I have heard a sonless man cannot even attain heaven, because when by having son, one pays his debts to the ancestors. And if he dies without having a son, then even the forefathers will not get their Shraddha offerings, and thus the entire dynasty will not be getting the benefit of having a son. And this way, he became very anxious. So he reached out to some of the rishis and said that, is it not possible, just like Vyasdev has beget us into our mothers, who was not the husband of our mothers, but it was the call of the time that Vyasdev was called upon, being the brother, he could now perform the ceremony of Garbhadan so that the royal kingdom gets a heir. Similarly, I would like rishis can now beget children in my wives, because I am not capacitated to do that. So the Rishi said to them that by our ascetic powers, we can see that you will undoubtedly have children. And these children will not be ordinary children. They'll be like gods themselves. So you please carry on with the life, and some solutions will come about, which will then offer you children. So Pandu was contemplating, and he went to his wife Kunti and said to her that this is what is going through in my mind, and I desire offsprings. How can we now achieve? Why would you like to beget children on my behalf through some rishis? At that point in time, Kunti revealed to Pandu that when she was at her husband's house, she served the Durvasa Muni very nicely, and therefore she was then given a mantra. And by chanting that mantra, she can invite or invoke the presence of whoever gods she would like to, and then she can beget a child from that god. And Kunti, of course, did not share the secret of Karna, but Kunti knew for sure that this is possible because it has happened in the past. Karna was born by Sangal himself. So this way, seeing her husband's determination, Kunti agreed to then invoke through the mantra, invoke some of the gods and try to fulfill the desire of her husband. And Pandu was very overjoyed upon hearing this boon that Kunti has been given. And so Kunti asked that, which god do you think I should call upon? And Pandu thought for some moments and then said that if you can call upon great god of dharma, the god of justice, he will never be able to pollute us with sin, and his son will undoubtedly be qualified in every way. And without much delay, Kunti assented to Pandu's request, and she called upon Dharma as she was meditating in her mind, reciting the mantras that Durvasa Muni has given. Within moments, the deity of Dharma appeared riding on a resplendent chariot. He was shining like the sun, and he smiled and said to Kunti, what is it that I can do for you? And Kunti replied in a trembling voice, saying that I would like a child by your illustrious self. And Dharma at once united with his spiritual form and then disappeared, leaving a child in Kunti's womb. And as this child born, a celestial voice appeared in the sky which said that this child will be the best and the most virtuous of men. He will be devoted to truth, he will be highly powerful, and he'll be famous throughout the world. He'll be known as Yudhishthir, and this boy, Yudhishthir, will rule the planet Earth. When Pandu heard these words from the sky, he was overjoyed, and he was feeling very fortunate that finally his longing desire got fulfilled, and now he does not need to be anxious about Shraddha and ancestors and about his own liberation. And he then also thought that Durvasa Muni has given boon to Kunti, and she can get even more children for the dynasty and for the safety of the Kuru dynasty in the future. And then he asked her to invoke Vayu, which is the wind god. And as Kunti meditated upon wind god, sure enough, the god appeared, and he was riding on a beautiful, huge deer. And he asked, "Oh Kunti, what do you desire of me?" And the Kunti then said, "Oh, best of the celestials, please give me a son who will possess immense bodily strength and who will be capable of humbling the pride of everybody." And that way, the Vayu god agreed, and with his yogic powers approached Kunti and gave her the son in a womb. And when this son was born, there was again a voice in the sky, and he said, "This child will be the best of all those endowed with strength and power." And this way, Bhimsen was then born. And at one time, after Bhima's birth, Mother Kunti was sitting near the edge of a mountain cliff, and Bhima was sleeping in her lap. And suddenly a tiger roared nearby, and she became very fearful, and the baby rolled from her lap over the cliff edge. Struck with horror, Pandu quickly went down the cliff and wanted to check if the child is still alive. To his amazement, what Pandu saw that the rock on which the baby had landed has been smashed into pieces, and this child was happily throwing his arms and legs around. And so Pandu realized that Bhimsen was extremely powerful. He gently picked up the child and brought him back to Kunti. In this way, even with two sons, Pandu was not very satisfied, and he again said that, why don't you invoke Indra and get a very, very powerful devotee, because Indra ultimately is a devotee of the Lord, and he has performed so many sacrifices in the past to become Indra and to satisfy Lord Vishnu. So if you do beget a child from Indra, then that child will be very, very powerful, and he can perhaps do some justice for our dynasty. So then after that, fair enough that again Kunti chanted the mantra, and Indra appeared before her, and the powerful thousands-eyed Indra then gave a child to Kunti, who was dark complexioned child. And there was third time the heavenly voice came upon and mentioned that, oh Kunti, this child will be equal in strength to Indra, and indeed Lord Shiva himself. And this child will be called Arjun. And he will spread your fame everywhere. He will subject all the powerful kings and increase the prosperity of your dynasty. And Agni, Shiva, and Indra will all be gratified by this boy's service. He will be equal in powers and will be famous throughout the three worlds. Sorry, he shall have no equals. He shall have no equals in prowess, and he will be famous throughout the three worlds. So in this way, these three boys were born, and then again Pandu was thinking that now he has three matchless sons, and seeing the wonderful results of the Durvasa's boon, he decided to ask Kunti to use the mantra fourth time. But now Kunti said to her that this is not possible. At the time of emergency, what has happened. For in the scriptures, for a woman to have intercourse with more than 3 men is not allowed. And how can I? And that too is allowed only in emergencies like this, for these kind of noble reasons. Therefore, I cannot go ahead. And then Madri approached Pandu and said that, look, Kunti has 3 sons, and I have heard that Gandhari has got 100 children, and I haven't got anyone. Can I not get this boon to me? And then he said, yes, why not? I've been thinking about it, but I've never thought that I would ask you, because I didn't know what's going in your mind. Therefore, you ask Kunti. She said, no, why don't you ask Kunti that she bestow upon this mantra upon me, and then I can have children as well. So the monarch, the Pandu, he finally spoke to Kunti, and without any hesitation, Kunti gave this mantra and asked Madri that, who would you like to invite? And Madri was thinking that probably I'm not going to get second chance, so why not I call the twin gods, which is Ashwini gods, and if they can beget children into me. And as soon as she thought of Ashwini gods, they were just present before her, and they begot 2 children, Nakul and Sahadev. And there was 4th time the divine voice which said that these virtuous and accomplished sons will transcend in energy and beauty, even their celestial fathers. So Nakul and Sahadev will become one of the most beautiful children, and very, very intelligent children of the 5 Pandavas. So this way, Pandu managed to get 5 children from his 2 wives. Dharmaraj Yudhishthir, Vayuputra Bhim, Indraputra Arjun, and Ashwini Kumar Putras Nakul and Sahadev. And like that, as when their lives were going on, for next 12 years, Pandu could live his life very peacefully, and his children were growing in forests. So we have to understand that early childhood of Pandavas is in complete simplicity in the dwellings of the forest, without any royal comforts, without any kingly palaces, and without any royalty at all. So when we see Arjun in this shape and form, we can figure this out, that how he's so pious, like his father, Pandu, who had no attachments later on, and who was completely living life of asceticism. So providence had to come true. And one time when Pandu was in the Saptasrot mountain, when spring had arrived and he was living his life with 5 youthful sons, he started to feel young again, and he was sporting with the boys in the hills. He will climb the rocks and go to the caves and challenge the lions. It's still very Kshatriya. And they would dive and play in the mountain pools and the water bodies, and climb the trees and wrestle and laugh and roll about in softy, grassy slopes. And they were having good life. One time when Madri was out to fetch roots, etc., Pandu was with them, and Kunti was not with them, and other children were not with them. Somehow, with the beautiful atmosphere of the spring and in that mountain setting, Pandu's heart, suddenly influenced by Cupid, started to feel these desires of pleasure for Madri, and he just could not stop himself. He completely forgot about the kingdom's curse, Rishi kingdom's curse. And Madri completely knew that this is what can happen. The curse can come true. So she was seized by the conflicting emotions, thinking that she was happy on one side that the king was approaching her. At the same time, she was fearful, thinking of the results. And as her husband was approaching her, she would avoid the situation, and that would further evoke the desires in husband's heart. And this way, Pandu just could not resist, and somehow he completely forgotten about this curse. Even though Kunti is constantly saying it to, Madri is constantly saying it to him, he wouldn't just listen. Her emotions were getting clashed, her mind was petrified, and in this such situation, somehow she wanted to prevent Pandu, and as she was trying that, Pandu was even coming stronger, and just thus overpowered by desires, he just could not resist himself. And as he was trying to enjoy his senses, Pandu's chest was seized with a terrible pain, and in few seconds, his body stiffened, went slack, and he left the body, which fell from Madri's arms onto the ground. And this is how sad, in a very, very difficult way, in a very sorrowful way, Madri then approached Kunti, telling her that what has just happened. Between them two, they discussed the whole situation. Kunti just could not digest the truth, and she said to Madri that we were together, we were always talking to each other, and we were sure that how, when you were alone, that this has happened. And Madri narrated the entire story to her, to Kunti, and then Madri said that I would like to go back with my husband on the funeral pyre, because he wanted to enjoy with me, and I would like to carry on my life with him. And then Kunti said, no, it should be me who should go to the fire. And then between them, Kunti understood that if Madri lives, then she'll be under this guilt all her life. And thus, between them two, they decided and Madri would go on the funeral pyre. All the rishis and sages, they collected the woods for the last rites and ceremonies. And Madri then embraced the body of Pandu in the funeral pyre, and they both left together from that point. And now we can imagine Yudhishthir Maharaj, at that time Yudhishthir, the boy Yudhishthir, he gave the fire to the funeral pyre, and then Kunti with his 5 sons, they came back to Hastinapur. And when they came back to Hastinapur, obviously entire big group of all the sages and charnas and all the rishis, they came along with the asti of the Pandu and Madri, and gave all of that back to Hastinapur to the king Dhritarashtra. So this way we see how Pandu, who was a pious king, gave up almost all his possessions to Dhritarashtra, his blind brother. And this selflessness, this act of selflessness and simplicity and truthfulness and kindness and religiosity was sitting in the heart of all the sons of Pandu. They were not ordinary people. They were not born in contrast to that, Gandhari, she also conceived a child, but that child had a long gestation period of 2 years, and child was not yet born. And that time, Gandhari, in frustration, started to hit her womb by her hands. And all she realized that she gave birth, still birth, to a lump, a round ball of flesh, which came out of her womb. Looking at her, she started to cry. And then she started to remember Vyasadeva, who has said that she will give birth to 100 children. And Vyasadeva appeared on the scene, and he said that my words can never go in vain. And then he cut them into 100 pieces. He got the pots of ghee, and he put each one piece of them into each of the ghee pots. And ultimately, he said that do not disturb these pots for another 2 years. And then after 2 years, which means from the conception to the birth, 4 years are going to go by. And that time, when the children will, then the children will born. And exactly that happened. The very first pot, when they opened it, the child born was Duryodhan. At that point in time, there were a lot of ill omens all across the Hastinapur. There was all kinds of ill omens were happening. And Dhritarashtra, he got confused, and he asked Vidura as to what can be done, and Bhishma, why these ill omens are there. So at that time, Vidura told very clearly that this son of yours will bring complete destruction of the entire Kuru dynasty. This is what these ill omens mean. And therefore, you must get rid of him right now. But Dhritarashtra could not muster the courage of detachment and intelligence to do that. And from that point onwards, all the Kauravas were born. So there's a big contrast between the birth of Pandavas and Kauravas, and how one party is representing Dharma and the virtuousness and the goddess and the gods, and other party is representing the demoniac forces. And these forces are born in the same family. I wanted to touch upon the aggressors but I can see it's already 41 past 20. So maybe I can still touch upon a part of it, and then we can take it to the next class. So when the Pandavas came, there was a lot of differences between these two parties, and in due course of time, the hatred between them increased, specifically from the Duryodhan side, because he could not resist the popularity, the love that Pandavas were getting, not only from the royal family, but also from the citizens of Hastinapur. And he started to think that how can he get rid of these Pandavas? He had been attempting it, but this time he came up with a plot along with Sakuni that what could be the best way to get rid of them in one go. And that's where we will see that later how Pandavas were sent to Varnavrata in a lakh house, which was built of inflammable materials. And then they were attempted to burn. Pandavas were attempted to be burnt alive. And all these plans, obviously, we understand from Mahabharata that did not fructify, and the Pandavas came victorious. In our next session, I'll touch upon that. I'll take the entire pastime from the point of hatred to the point of how Pandavas managed to rescue themselves with the help of Uncle Vidura. So we'll talk about that. And therefore, we can say in today's session that Arjuna's rightful position at this point in time was to ensure to punish these aggressors rightfully and kill them under the order of Lord Krishna, because they were demoniac forces and they were here, and Krishna was here to fulfill his mission of paritranai sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam. So paritranai sadhunam, he's going to speak Bhagavad Gita after this chapter. So that way, he's saving the sadhus who are inclined to worship Lord Krishna, who are inclined to realize their real self and their constitutional position, who are inclined to make sure that the human body, which they have been awarded, is used for the purpose of life or goal of life, which is nothing but to rebuild or rekindle our relationship, loving relationship, serving relationship with the Supreme Lord. And so that's something he's doing by speaking this Gita. And Vinashaya cha dushkritam, that he's going to do by making Arjun as an instrument of his will. And we will see how Arjun will finally, who's not wanting to fight right now, after hearing this Bhagavad Gita Upadesh, he will choose to fight and annihilate all these enemies in one shot. So this is 45 past 20 now. And I invite, if there are any comments, corrections, any questions that assembled devotees may have in this Zoom session. Hare Krishna.
Really nice class, Prabhuji. Also understand so many things. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Okay, so I think everybody loved the pastimes of early childhood of Pandavas and how they appear appear to the father, who was as noble and kind and austere, and therefore their heart was always saintly, always gentle, always very soft. Their hearts were always very soft. Even in the worst calamities, they behaved in a very rightful manner, never transgressing the etiquettes of neither the king or the devotees. So such wonderful, illustrious role model. And if our children, they listen to these pastimes and they listen to these qualities of Pandavas, in due course of time, they will imbibe some of these qualities which will do good to the world. And therefore, coming together in sessions like this and hearing these role models is really, really important for us, so that we can continue to behave in a rightful manner. So then I call it a class now, call it a day. I don't think there's any other comments coming. Okay, there's a comment, Hare Krishna pronounced, very informative class. Thank you, Hare Krishna. Okay, thank you. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubheva cha patitanam pavnebhyo vaishnavebhyo.
Thank
Jai
you.
Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Ram
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare
Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you. Very long, lengthy story.